The year is 1493. The ancient regime has experienced 2 decades of prosperity and growth. The rule of King Louis X had seen the kingdom finally embrace the political renaissance, which had been previously shunned for being too Italian by the regency before him. As he claimed the throne, the boy king had been thrust into conflict with his uncle Jan III of Burgundy. The young king fought an intensive campaign of maneuver in the lowlands before his uncle was slain by a stray crossbow bolt, leading to the dissolution of the kingdom of Burgundy. But now, Louis X was gone, and his only child, Louis XI, had ascended to the throne. Unlike his father, Louis was not a born warrior. In fact, he was a patron of the arts, often touring the lands of Milan, Venice, and Rome in search of pieces that sung to his soul. He was a just king. He gave the burghers much power to make changes and reform in the name of commerce. Perhaps he gave them too much power. Whilst the king was on tour once more in Milan, the burghers would make a deal that set the stage for a French takeover of Italy. Unbeknownst to Louis, the burghers had already agreed to return the province of Artois to the Austrian Empire. In return, they would no longer need to pay commercial tariffs within the Italian regions of the empire. On March 3rd, Louis returned to Paris to find that Artois had been placed under siege by an Austrian force numbering 10,000 strong. Diplomatic overtures by the king led to little result, only angering the Austrians, and leading to the revocation of trade rights in Italy. With little remaining choice, Louis declared war on Austria on the 7th of April. The War of Artois had begun. Louis set to work on raising an army to recapture Artois. Despite some minor setbacks, Louis was able to take command of an army of 7,000 men-at-arms and 17,000 levies, by the time he had reached the Austrian camp on the 25th of May. At the offset of the battle, the Austrian army was inexperienced, and despite holding the fortifications, they were quickly swept off the field. The king was sending a message to his enemies, both internally and externally. The power was his, and his alone. The Austrians, however, had not been sitting idly by. Maximilian I, Archduke of Austria, Elector of Bohemia, and Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, had spent the past months preparing for a scenario exactly like which he faced now. By signing a deal with the Italian kingdoms, the Emperor was able to smuggle a force of 18,000 Austrian and 30,000 Bohemians through the Alps to begin a siege of the port city of Toulon. Realizing that time was not his ally, Maximilian pushed further into French territory in an attempt to take both control of the port region of Aix and the western edges of the Alps. He believed that holding Aix would do enough damage to French trade that Louis would be forced to sue for peace, as breaking a defense in the mountains would be far too risky for the French to ever pursue. He was wrong. Merely days after the mountain passes were captured, a French force arrived to make battle. Estimates vary on the size of the French army, with French historians mostly agreeing on between 60 and 70,000 soldiers on their side, whilst Austrian estimates run up to 125,000 French soldiers. Whilst the size of the army was not clear, the result was: France killed or captured the entire northern Austrian army, leaving the Bohemian Corps cut off and undersupplied in Aix. They were quickly destroyed by Louis's armies. Now, both having crossed through much of the Alps, the armies faced severe supply issues, with the demoralized Bohemian corps retreating en masse at the first sign of the French army. Every effort made by Maximilian had been thoroughly countered, and trust in his leadership was beginning to wane. Rebellions began to spring up all over the Habsburg kingdom. Naturally, people were unhappy with the failings of Maximilian rule. With a stagnant economy and now a losing war, volunteers for the army were becoming rather hard to come by. And with recent developments, there was now an armed revolt in the province of Unterkarten. All this left Maximilian with a dilemma. He needed to stop the French from crossing into Austria and crush the rebellion. But his forces were too thin to be able to tackle both at the same time, meaning that the Austrians would have to hit one hard before moving on to the other. Maximilian called his 80,000 reserves to Steiermark, and began to march southwards to the rebel camp and bring the fight to them. After 3 days of bloody street fighting, the rebels retreated to Gauze, and as Maximilian set up camp to fight them on this new battlefield, they scattered to the wind, causing Maximilian much concern. Louis took advantage of Maximilian's decision and rushed to occupy the Austrian provinces bordering France, and then the region of Tyrol. The exhausted Austrian army, which had rushed to defend the region many times before, was routed in all of 6 hours, leaving West Austria open to French occupation. Maximilian was captured and brought to Louis, where he was forced to sign a humiliating treaty where the richer region of Silesia would be stripped from Austrian control, and Maximilian would be removed from the throne.